Hey guys, tonight we slip silently into a room so still you can hear the candle wax sigh as it slides down its silver spine. Snow sighs against the palace windows. A quill scratches across imported paper, of course, because even Catherine, the great secrets, demanded French stationery. She's not signing decrees, not plotting war. No, tonight she writes to her lover. Naked except for a fox fur flung over her shoulders like a battle cape. She's propped against silk cushions, legs tangled in furs, sipping wine made from Crimean grapes her armies had only just secured. And you, lucky you, get to peek over her shoulder as she dips her quill and murmurs, asterisk, to my dearest, if only your mouth were here instead of this ink. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't survive long in 18th century Russian court life unless you're part steel, part silk, and part something. No. One can quite define something Catherine had in obscene abundance. She's 17 when she first arrives from Prussia. Fresh-faced, underslept, probably starving because the corset's so tight it's practically medieval CPR. Married off to a Russian grand duke with the sexual charisma of a wax candle and the intellect to match. That duke? Future Tsar Peter III, a man who reportedly preferred playing with toy soldiers in bed to touching his actual wife. Historians still argue whether their marriage was ever consummated. But one thing's clear, Catherine quickly realized that if she wanted to survive, she'd need to become fluent in power, not just in the boardroom, but in the bedroom too. And not just power over, power with. She didn't seduce to dominate, she seduced to align. That's the trick. It starts with letters, always letters, written late at night, when the palace creaks and the servants are too tired to eavesdrop. In them, you see a Catherine who's sharp as vinegar and soft as velvet, sometimes in the same sentence. My lion, she calls Orlov in one. You make my body roar louder than any battlefield. No emojis, just ink, perfume, and barely contained scandal. The thing is, Russian winters are long. And when your husband's not interested and your advisors all think you're ornamental, well, what's a future empress to do? She starts writing her own story, line by line, lover by lover. And while we're on lovers, yes, there were many. But they weren't just pretty faces. They were generals, thinkers, diplomats, men with ideas and ambitions. Catherine didn't just collect them, she elevated them, sometimes dangerously so. You'll see, her first documented affair, Sergei Saltykov, a courtier with good looks and better gossip skills. Some say he fathered her son Paul, though even that's debated. What isn't debated? The erotic thrill of rebellion wrapped in velvet sheets. Imagine being a girl in a hostile court where you're watched, tested, whispered about, and the only place you can speak freely is between the lines of a love letter, one you have to burn immediately after reading. But she kept some. Of course she did, you would too. Because they weren't just love letters. They were proof of her desires, yes, but also of her strategy. Her seductions weren't just personal, they were political. She could make a man feel like he was the axis of her world while maneuvering him into position like a knight on a chessboard. And chess? She loved it. There's a rumor too delicious not to believe that she once sent a pawn-shaped love note to a foreign ambassador that simply said, asterisk, your move, asterisk, then is the beginning of letters written with the weight of empires behind them, of nights scented with wax, sweat, and crushed roses, of Catherine the Great, whose name would be remembered not just for her policies or palaces, but for the way she made men weep into their medals and beg for just one more line, one more touch, one more midnight behind the drapes. And you're right here, watching the ink dry. Just don't blink too loud. The walls have ears. You watch her now, not yet empress, just a pawn named Sophie from the minor German nobility paraded through corridors that smell like wax and damp velvet. Her slippers, soaked from Russian slush, tracked inside by 40 fur-coated dignitaries. She's 15. Her mother's hissing instructions in her ear, reminding her to smile, tilt her chin, breathe shallowly to keep the corset tight. This is Peter's court, and Peter, well, Peter is a tragedy in waiting. He wears military uniforms to breakfast, gets drunk by noon, and allegedly once got jealous of a rat who won a mock trial staged with his toy soldiers. Catherine later claims he tried to force her to watch the rat's execution. Historians still argue whether this story is metaphor or madness. Either way, she's trapped. No friends, no power, no exit, except one, charm. But this isn't Disney Princess. Charm. This is psychological judo smiling while memorizing who gossips, who drinks, who wants what. You learn quickly that Catherine's seduction wasn't born in candlelight, but in survival. There are whispers, always, and one too many leering glances from men twice her age with twice the influence. One particularly bloated duke gives her a fur-lined prayer book and brushes her wrist too long. Another calls her asterisk, my little foreign. Dove asterisk while licking wine off his fingers. Her husband ignores her. The Empress Elizabeth critiques her posture. The servants won't look her in the eye. But Catherine watches them all, every twitch, every lowered voice. And soon, she realizes, if you can't hold power yet, make them want you. If they want you, you can choose who gets close and who gets burned. And so begins the slow art of calculated allure. Not lace or lipstick, although she wears both well, but laughter at just the right moment. A gaze held 1 second too long. Letters slipped to courtiers that say nothing and everything in the same breath. A young page starts sneaking her. Books Voltaire, Plutarch, Ovid, and she devours them like someone starving. One night, she writes in her journal, asterisk, I must make myself indispensable. Not pretty, not pleasing, indispensable. You sit beside her as she studies Russian in secret by candlelight, practicing the alphabet until her fingers blister. She gets sick, nearly dies. Some say the stress of suppressing her own voice was poisoning her. Then comes Saltykov, Sergei. Handsome, flirty, and only marginally useful politically, but my God, the spark. You feel it when their hands brush. You hear it when he compliments her reading voice during a court poetry night. And one snowy evening, when the court is drunk on honey vodka, they disappear down a quiet hallway. The next morning, Catherine walks into chapel 5 minutes late, hair slightly undone, eyes shining like she's just rewritten gravity. No one says a word. Everyone knows the risk is enormous. But it's the first time you see her not just survive, but take. Still, it's not all moonlit glances. There's rot beneath the satin. Rumors of forced affections, secret pregnancies, and nobility treating foreign princesses like chess pieces. Historians still debate whether Catherine's early affairs were rebellion or coercion, or some blurred mess of both. But what's clear is this. Sex in court isn't about love, it's currency. And Catherine? She's learning to make it pay dividends. Here's your fringe fact of the night. Empress Elizabeth Catherine's predecessor was so obsessed with youth and control. She supposedly forbade anyone at court to wear the same dress twice and had ladies-in-waiting stripped naked just to change corset patterns. Control wasn't just political, it was physical, visual, intimate. In that world, Catherine's body becomes a battlefield. Every glance, every gown, every whisper behind a fan is a calculation. By 17, she's mastered the art of being. Watched without revealing anything true. And so, night by night, letter by letter, she builds her arsenal, not of weapons, but of stories. Tales she whispers to trusted pages, truths she tucks into coded diary entries. Fantasies she scrawls on the back of political memos. They're not always romantic. Sometimes they're raw. One note simply reads, asterisk, if he wants my body, let him beg for my mind. Asterisk, by now, you're in deep with her. You feel it, that slow, seething defiance she carries like perfume. She isn't yet the Catherine of statues and empires. She's still Sophie. Still alone. Still learning the terrifying, thrilling secret that will define her reign. Desire can be dangerous, but it can also be power. You're in her private. Study now, a room lined with books that smell like ink and ambition, lit by candles that flicker. Against crimson walls, it's quiet, but not peaceful. Catherine, now Empress, is sketching something onto a sheet of parchment. Not words, but shapes. Ovals, rectangles, crude noses and chins. Beside her, a little locked box. Inside it, a gallery of seduction, tiny portraits of every man she's ever let close, tucked neatly between diplomatic correspondence and war plans. Welcome to the mustache files. This isn't vanity. It's strategy. Because every name, every face in that secret collection marks a treaty forged not in boardrooms, but in bedrooms. And you're about to see how Catherine turned affection into administration. One lover at a time. She doesn't fall in love easily anymore. Not like with Saltykov. She's smarter now. Sharper. Her heart? Still beating, but under lock and key. So when a new man catches her eye, it isn't just desire, it's potential. Could he serve? Could he influence trade? Soothe a volatile faction? Look good at formal dinners. Be discreet? These aren't pickup lines, they're prerequisites. You'd expect this kind of ruthless matchmaking from a hiring manager, not a monarch with a heart, but Catherine blends both. She's not playing with dolls, she's assembling a court. One lover once described the experience of being chosen by her like being asterisk, tugged into orbit. You don't say no to Catherine, not because you're afraid, but because saying yes feels like joining history. And the letters? Oh, they evolve. No more teenage yearning. Now it's prose so precise, it reads like statcraft disguised as pillow. Talk. In one she writes, asterisk, you enter my thoughts as swiftly as you entered Poland. It's flirtation. And foreign policy. See, Catherine's great seduction isn't physical, it's intellectual. She doesn't just want a man in bed. She wants him in policy debates, in planning sessions, in the margins of Enlightenment texts she reads before breakfast. And if he can't keep up, into the drawer he goes, literally, back into the box, labeled, cataloged, replaced. And yes, the box was real, hidden in her bedroom chamber behind a false panel. Some sources say there were at least a dozen miniature portraits, each mounted with a tiny inscription, name, dates, and sometimes a pet name. She called one asterisk, the Firebird, another asterisk, the Quiet Storm, its part sentimental part. A Tsar filing system. Historians still argue whether she maintained it herself, or had an aide manage the updates. But either way, it's the softest, most seductive Excel spreadsheet in imperial history. Here's where things get spicier. Catherine begins drafting. Protocols. Not official ones, these were private tests. Before accepting a new lover, she'd reportedly send them through a vetting process. One version says she'd invite them to a dinner with ambiguous seating, watch their reactions to being placed far from her, and judge their emotional stability by dessert. Another tale, possibly exaggerated, claims she had her physician conduct a physical inspection to ensure they were compatible. Not too eager, not too dull, just enough heat to warm a throne, not burn it. Quirky tidbit time. One of Catherine's lesser-known amusements was commissioning erotic furniture. Yep, it's believed she owned a chaise lounge designed for two-angled just so, with grooves in all the right places. Whether it was used often or mostly for show remains unclear, but one ambassador described her quarters as asterisk, a space where pleasure and intellect cohabitate with alarming harmony. Which honestly Goals. Still, with all this power play, not every affair was smooth. Some got clingy. Others started imagining themselves as co-rulers. Bad idea. Catherine didn't do shared thrones. One lover, Alexander Vasilchikov, reportedly received a 20,000 ruble pension and a palace when she dismissed him. A golden parachute, because even when she let you go, she did it in style. You pleased me, she allegedly wrote, asterisk, but now you bore me, and boredom is the beginning of death. Asterisk, you can't help but admire the honesty. In a world where monarchs pretended virtue and courtiers faked loyalty, Catherine kept her cards on the table painted, perfumed, and properly labeled. This wasn't coldness, it was clarity. And it made her irresistible. Men weren't seduced because she lied. They fell because she told the truth and made it feel like a gift. You will not keep me, she once warned a young officer, asterisk, but you will never forget me. And judging by the mustache files, no one ever did. You hear them before you see them, boots pounding marble, silver buttons clinking like teeth, the crackle of parchment orders being flung open in candlelight. And then there's Catherine, barely dressed, laughing as she slips behind a velvet screen while Gregory Orlov, shirt half unbuttoned, stashes a dagger in his boot. This isn't a date night, it's a coup. While the court sleeps, Catherine and her lover are about to overthrow her own husband. And what's their weapon of choice? Seduction, darling. With a touch of artillery. This is the night that turns her from puppet wife into empress, and the bedroom is just as critical as the battlefield. But back up just a bit. You first meet Orlov not in a ballroom, but in a stable. He smells like horse sweat and leather, and that's part of the appeal. A soldier's soldier. Broad shoulders, sharp instincts, and the kind of man who makes Catherine's ladies-in-waiting blush and drop their lace fans. He's not educated, not polished, but he listens, really listens. And more importantly, he believes in her. When Peter III begins unraveling alienating nobles, mocking orthodox rituals, planning to ditch Catherine for a mistress, the court doesn't just gossip. It starts to look for a way out. And Orlov? He offers Catherine the door. And maybe the throne. Here's where seduction becomes strategy. Catherine doesn't just lie in bed whispering sweet nothings. She's plotting allegiances between kisses, gathering loyalty between silk sheets. The guards? Flattered. The church? Coaxed. The army? Bribed and half in love. Orlov and his brothers form the muscle, but Catherine provides the pulse. One of her letters to him reads, asterisk, "Tonight I dreamt you crowned me. I woke wet with anticipation. Wet with ambition, too. Because when the coup begins, barely a year after their affair ignites, it's not Orlov standing on the palace. Steps in a breastplate and crimson sash. It's Catherine. Sword at her hip. Thunder in her voice. Historians still argue whether the sex caused the revolution or merely accompanied it. But either way, it worked. Peter is deposed without much bloodshed. Within a week, he's mysteriously dead, most likely murdered by someone loyal to Catherine, possibly even Orlov. Catherine says she had nothing to do with it. But the timing? Let's just say it's suspiciously cinematic. Picture this. A woman who was once dismissed as a foreign girl in lace now rides through St. Petersburg on a white horse, cheered by troops she seduced with ideas and whispers, crowned by forces she once shared a bed with. And the city? It doesn't mourn. Peter. It barely notices he's gone. After the coup, Catherine rewards Orlov handsomely. Lands, titles, influence. She even has a medal struck in his honor, though not for love, for service. Their romance cools eventually, as all her romances do. He gets jealous, erratic. She tires of his temper. But for a time, they're the power couple of the century. She calls him my thunder, and he calls her Mother Russia. It's weirdly hot. Until it isn't. Here's your quirky tidbit of the night. Catherine once gifted Orlov a life-size mechanical peacock imported from France. Why? Because he'd compared her to one during a banquet, majestic, watchful, and impossible to ignore. The peacock sang when wound. Its feathers glittered. No word on whether it also glared at guests like Catherine occasionally did, when bored. But the gift says it all. She was never just seducing men. She was making them see themselves reflected. In her eyes, grander, shinier, necessary. Still, love and loyalty don't always walk hand in hand. Eventually, Orlov falls from grace. He cheats, drinks, begs for forgiveness in a series of increasingly embarrassing letters. Catherine keeps one, underlining a line where he calls her asterisk, my reason for breath. Underneath, she writes in the margin, asterisk, then why did you choke it? Cold? Maybe, but fair, because Catherine doesn't love like a teenager anymore. She loves like a monarch calculating risk, weighing consequence, hiding her heartbreak behind state dinners and flirty, diplomatic notes. She never stops desiring. But now she's in control of the map. And if your name ends up in her letterbox, it means you've passed every test, political, emotional, physical. At least for now. And so the Orlov chapter closes. But the ink's still wet, because a new name is about to arrive on Catherine's lips. One she'll never fully let go of. A name that will survive revolutions, distance, jealousy, even other lovers. Gregory Potemkin. Remember it. You'll be hearing it whispered between palace walls for years. You wake to the clink of glass against glass. The sound of 2 spoons, stirring in 2 separate teacups served not in the dining room, but in twin adjoining chambers. One for her, one for him. Catherine and Gregory Potemkin. Empress in general, partners, ex-lovers, forever, something. If Orlov was fire and noise, Potemkin is smoke and symphony. You never quite see where he begins and ends in her life, and neither does she. They fight like lovers, write like poets, and scheme like twins. And tonight, you're going to read their letters, not just for lust, but for longing, for fury, for brilliance too big to stay contained in just one body. It begins, as always, with a gaze. Potemkin appears at court after Catherine's rise. A decorated officer with a lazy eye and an appetite for theater. Not your typical heartthrob. He's brash, vulgar at times, a show-off, but somehow when he walks into a room, it tilts toward him. Catherine notices. How could she not? The man recites Homer by memory, weeps at Italian opera, then duels a noble at breakfast. She's intrigued. And soon, involved, passionately. Potemkin moves into her bedchamber, and more dangerously, into her political circle. He's the first man who doesn't just flirt with her body, he flirts with her empire. They love wildly. Loudly. One courtier claimed he walked in on them tangled in maps on the floor, arguing over Crimea mid-kiss. But this love burns too hot to last. They clash his jealousy, her independence. Their affair ends, officially. But Catherine doesn't exile him. No, she promotes him. Keeps him close. They invent a new arrangement, separate beds, joint visions. Potemkin becomes her unofficial co-ruler, her fixer, her general, her ghost. Lovers come and go. But he's always there, looming behind the curtain, finishing her sentences in both war councils and dinner parties. The letters they send each other? Volcanic. You read one where she calls him asterisk, my eagle, my torment, my other self. Another ends with asterisk, if I had a second soul, you would wear it. And these aren't just sweet nothings. They include battle updates, border strategy, domestic. Reforms all punctuated with phrases like, I miss your mouth on mine, and asterisk. You are both my fire and my frost. Historians still argue whether they were secretly married. Some say there was a private ceremony. Others insist it was a symbolic union of minds. But either way, the connection outlasts passion. It becomes structure. Here's a delicious fringe. Detail. Potemkin once commissioned matching palaces for him and Catherine, separated by hundreds of miles. Yes, but each with a secret room styled identically. Same furniture, same colors, same scent burned in the fireplace. So that when they wrote to each other, they could imagine the other sitting in the same chair, drinking the same wine, petting the same type of lapdog. Like a teleportation spell. Crafted from upholstery. Love by design. But even Catherine, for all her control, occasionally slips. When Potemkin sends her a gift jewelry from the Turkish front, she's seen holding it under her sleeve during a dull ministerial meeting, rubbing the chain between her fingers like a talisman. And when he's away too long, her letters grow impatient, sharp. She scolds him for leaving her bored, then flips and begs him to take care of his health, then flips again and reminds him that you are nothing without my blessing. It's messy, tender, utterly human, and somehow still imperial. Meanwhile, he continues to act like a war god in lace. Potemkin expands the Russian Empire southward, conquers Crimea, and stages grand spectacles with fake villages to impress foreign dignitaries. Ever heard of a Potemkin village? That's him allegedly building facades to trick Catherine into thinking a region was thriving. Modern scholars debate how much was illusion versus propaganda, but either way, it worked. Catherine toured the land with confidence, and Europe trembled at her nerve. But even in conquest, their bond pulses. He sends letters wrapped in furs. She replies with verses of Greek poetry, annotated in her own hand. And when he falls ill in the later years, she doesn't replace him, she sends him doctors, wines, letters written on rose-colored paper. One line reads, asterisk, if you die before me, I shall be empress to the earth, but widow to the sky. Asterisk, it's not romantic in the conventional sense. It's stranger, deeper. Catherine doesn't need Potemkin to love her like a courtier. She needs him to see her whole, and he does. Even when he's furious. Even when they're sleeping with other people. He remains her myth, her mirror. And you? You're lucky to read the rawness between them. The ache and the awe. The two most powerful souls in Russia, orbiting each other like twin stars burning. Too brightly to ever truly touch for long, but refusing to drift apart. Because some seductions don't end. They just change uniforms. You're in a shadowy salon now, heavy with candle smoke and orange blossom perfume, where flirtation swirls with espionage like cream in dark coffee. Catherine lounges in a brocade robe, legs tucked under her, reading. A letter not from a lover, but from a philosopher, Voltaire. And then another, Diderot, Montesquieu. She's not just seducing men anymore. She's seducing Europe's mind. But what no one tells you is this. Behind the elegant calligraphy and high ideals, Catherine's correspondence becomes a network, part intellectual salon, part surveillance web, part flirt-fueled statcraft. Because when you rule an empire, every letter is a weapon, and every kiss might have a second set of eyes. Catherine doesn't send these letters with flowers. She sends them with couriers trained to memorize their route like stage actors learn. Lines never traveling the same way twice, never stopping at the same inn. Because inside these letters is more than sweet talk. There's philosophy, intelligence, strategy. The Enlightenment is her mistress now, and she plays it like a cello. When Voltaire calls her the Star of the North, she sends back a copy of her new legal code, annotated with footnotes that flirt and argue in equal measure. Diderot begs to visit, imagining long nights of discussion and candlelit reforms. She brings him in, shows him her libraries, politely ignores his affections, then sends him back to Paris with a pension and a glowing review. He leaves besotted. She gains credibility, but here's where it gets juicy. Catherine doesn't just correspond with thinkers. She mixes them into her personal court, invites musicians, painters, translators, and yes, young officers with strong thighs and suspiciously good French, because even her lovers double as informants. That marble bathtub you see wheeled discreetly into a side chamber. That's for the Viscount de Ligne, a Belgian noble with a taste for hot water and hotter secrets. He writes her love poems. She laughs, rolls her eyes, and asks him casually what the Austrians are planning next. He tells her, then asks for another. Massage. Historians still argue whether Catherine used pillow talk for political gain, or just happened to collect men who like to gossip between kisses. Either way, the pattern's clear. Men fall into her orbit, enchanted by her wit, then slip up and hand her pieces of the world. One French agent once claimed Catherine's boudoir produced better intelligence than Paris's entire diplomatic corps, and you believe it. Because who wouldn't tell her everything when she's reading your poem out loud, barefoot, sipping apricot brandy? And not all the letters are flattery. Some are biting. She once wrote to Frederick the Great, mocking his outdated views on women with asterisk. A man who fears the pen of a woman has never met her mind. Snap. That one was read aloud at salons across Europe. Catherine's seduction wasn't physical in the usual sense, it was theatrical. She used tone like a blade, posture like punctuation, and knew how to shift a conversation mid-sentence. With just a raised eyebrow. And yet, it wasn't all control. Sometimes the letters revealed cracks. In one to Potemkin, she confesses loneliness, admitting she feels more connected to books than people. In another, she signs off not as Catherine, 2, Empress of all Russia, but simply your trembling friend. That's the thing. When you rule alone, you have to stretch every bond you can. Lovers became therapists, spies became comfort, philosophy became pillow talk, and secrets? Those became currency. Your fringe fact for the night. Catherine was obsessed with having the fastest mail system in Europe. She commissioned thousands of new post horses, built relay stations, even ordered that certain routes have heated rooms where couriers could warm their hands before continuing. Also her letters, whether to lovers, allies, or intellectuals, arrived. Warm, fresh, and deadly efficient. Imagine seduction delivered overnight, with wax seals and state secrets wrapped in love. And some of these letters, my God. One to a Swedish prince ends with, asterisk, my lips remember your name even when my mind forgets your politics. Another, to a young German noble, asterisk, if only treaties were written on skin, I'd have signed you thrice by now. It's absurdly good. Even the men who didn't get to touch her felt like they had. That was her gift. She didn't just conquer armies. She conquered imaginations. And you? You're standing in the hallway now, watching these pages flutter between fingers, disappear into safes or burn in fireplaces. But not all of them. Some letters survive. Some fragments, some innuendos, some furious footnotes in the margins of Enlightenment texts that still bear her scent. Catherine the Great, Empress of Letters, Mistress of Secrets, and your quiet companion. Tonight, whispering across time from candle to candle. You hear it before you see it. Heels clacking on polished marble. The scent of jasmine and musk trailing ahead like a promise. Then he enters. Platon Zubov, 22, cheekbones sharp enough to slice paper, eyes full of empty compliments. And Catherine? 66, still ruling, still magnificent. And suddenly smitten. This is no fairy tale, it's a scandal. One that makes the court tremble with gossip and the empire shift under the weight of her desire. Tonight, you're watching her final favorite ascend. Not because he's wise or useful, but because he's beautiful. And sometimes, at the end of a long empire, that's all that matters. Zubov doesn't earn her attention with wit or battlefield prowess. He earns it by walking into a reception with the exact kind of face that makes men uncomfortable and women ... curious. Catherine spots him across a sea of powdered wigs and decaying egos and says, simply, asterisk, who is that boy? A week later, he's in her drawing room. 2 weeks in her bedroom. And within months, in every room that matters, including the council chamber. His rise is dizzying, even by imperial standards. One day, he's fetching wine at parties. The next, he's deciding minor trade policies and receiving diplomatic gifts meant for the Empress herself. The court can barely keep up. And the letters? Oh, they're something else entirely. Gone is the philosophical fencing. These are not Voltairean love notes. These are soft, sunlit things. Catherine calls him my treasure, my golden dawn, and signs one with a lipstick kiss pressed onto the parchment. Another ends with, asterisk, you walk through my thoughts the way spring walks through frozen gardens. Some historians read these letters and wince. Others defend them. But what no one denies is this. She loved him, deeply, and maybe a little desperately. But was it real? That's the question everyone starts whispering behind their fans. Did Zubov love her back, or did he just love the empire he could reach through her sheets? Historians still argue whether he manipulated her, or whether Catherine, always the sharpest knife in the drawer, knowingly indulged the fantasy. One aide claimed she said asterisk, let me have my illusion. It's mine to keep, not yours to understand. And maybe that's the whole story in one line. Here's your odd fact of the night. Zubov reportedly had a personal hairdresser whose only job was to curl his sideburns into perfect little spirals each morning. Why? Because Catherine liked to tug them playfully during meetings. Imagine being an ambassador from Sweden and watching the most powerful woman in Europe twist a grown man's sideburns like a cat toy while discussing grain tariffs. That's power, darling. Unapologetic, decadent power. But court life turns toxic fast. As Zubov's influence grows, so does resentment. Older generals grit their teeth. Ministers roll their eyes. Even Catherine's grandchildren start calling him the lapdog. But Catherine? She doesn't care. Not really. Because she knows the truth. She's aging, slower. Her hands tremble slightly when she signs orders. And Zubov? He makes her feel immortal again. Even if only for an evening dot still, the spell phrase. He grows arrogant, spoiled, occasionally cruel. He once interrupted a state. Report to complain that his favorite boots had gone missing. Catherine writes fewer letters, shorter ones, more distant. One says simply, asterisk, you are not what you were, and neither am I. That line sticks with you. Like the end of a season dot, and then it happens. Catherine dies unexpectedly of a stroke. No grand farewell, no final letter. Zubov reportedly collapses in tears, or flees in panic, depends who you ask. He's stripped of power almost immediately. The court breathes a sigh of relief. Her son Paul takes over and burns as many of her letters as he can find, desperate to erase the memory of his mother's youthful heart trapped in an old woman's body, but he fails. Because too many survive. Too many servants remember. 2. Many men, dismissed and pensioned off, still keep scraps of parchment that once bore her scent. And Zubov? He vanishes into history's side notes, forever known not as a man, but as a mirror, reflecting the last great flame of a woman who loved. Like an empire sudden, vast, a little terrifying, and always on her own terms. The room smells like smoke and lemon oil. It's quiet now. Not court quiet where silence means people are listening, but real silence. The kind that lingers after a legacy. You stand in a dim archive room, fingers brushing against letters. No one was supposed to keep. Because after Catherine died, her son Paul did what bitter sons tend to do when they inherit the diaries of extraordinary mothers. He panicked. He lit fires. Whole chests of correspondence were dragged into palace, courtyards, and burned. Not because they contained state secrets, but because they contained something more dangerous. Desire. You're looking at the ones that survived. Scorched edges, ink running like tears. Words Catherine thought she was whispering into the void, now echoing into eternity. There's one addressed simply asterisk, to my lion. Another, asterisk, my body is the empire I give you. They're fragments, yes, but potent ones. And what they reveal isn't scandal. It's strategy. Catherine didn't just rule with armies and decrees. She ruled with intimacy. Her seduction. Letters weren't weakness, they were governance in cursive. Written with the same hand that signed treaties, but dipped in something warmer than politics. These weren't just love notes. They were blueprints for influence, networks of emotional leverage, scaffolding for a throne built on both lust and logic. Historians still argue whether Catherine truly loved any of her favorites or simply performed. Affection as statecraft. But the surviving letters suggest something blurrier, more complicated. She was a ruler who craved control, but also closeness. She could draft a declaration of war and a love poem in the same hour. She kissed with one eye open. That's not performance. That's survival. One charred letter reads, asterisk, I trust you like I trust winter not to return. Which is to say beautifully and with foolish hope. You feel it. You feel her, not the marble statue, not the propaganda portrait, but the woman in candlelight, vulnerable and plotting, in the same breath. The curious thing? Catherine likely never meant to leave these for history. She once instructed a maid to burn all drafts. But drafts are stubborn. Some got tucked into books, left inside cabinets, pressed behind portraits. A few favorites, long retired and pensioned, kept their letters as trophies. Others, fearing retaliation from Tsar Paul, tried to sell them, leading to a few scandalous leaks in the European press. Voltaire once joked that if Catherine's pen ever fell silent, the whole continent would feel lonely. He wasn't wrong. Here's your fringe tidbit for tonight. One stash of letters was discovered inside a hollowed-out bust of Minerva, goddess of wisdom, hidden in plain sight on a mantelpiece. And the irony? Some of those letters were less wisdom, more raw yearning. One began with, asterisk, I watched your shadow cross the floor today. It was the only part of you I could touch. Let that haunt you gently as you fall asleep tonight. But this isn't just about love. This is about the myth of Catherine the Great. The scandalous empress, the nymphomaniac on the throne, the endless innuendo about horses. None of it tells you who she really was. That's why these letters matter, not because they're erotic, but because they're human. You read one where she confesses to feeling old. Another where she worries that, if I die in silence, no one will remember my laughter. And yet, she also writes defiantly, asterisk, I lived many lives inside one skin. That line, it's not just a quote. It's a map of how a woman ruled a continent, outwitted every man around her, and still had the nerve to ask for joy in a world that barely allowed her dignity. So here you are, in the quiet. The smoke has cleared, the wax seals are broken. The ink has dried, and still her voice lingers. Catherine didn't want to be remembered for her letters. She wanted to be remembered for her reforms, her libraries, her cities. But deep down, she must have known the truth. Policy fades. Paper lingers. And desire, that thread she wove through her entire reign, is the one thing empires can't bury. And now we wind down. Let your breath slow as the candlelight fades behind your eyelids. Picture Catherine, alone at her writing desk, dipping her quill one last time, eyes soft with memory, heart still beating with empire. Snow drifts against the palace walls. Somewhere her last letter is cooling on a silver tray. And you've made it through a tale stitched with power, perfume, and parchment. Close your eyes, knowing that history isn't cold. It's written in heat. End of script. Sweet dreams.